Chapter 10 of the Boy Scouts in a Trapper's Camp by Thornton W. Burgess. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. Life on the Fur Trails. Supper out of the way, the boys made themselves comfortable and gave Alec the word to take up his yarn. "To begin with," said Alec, throwing a log on the fire, "when a trapper is thinking of going to a new country, he generally prospects at first, same as a prospector for gold. Only he looks it over for signs of fur instead of for minerals. Sometimes he does this in the summer or early fall, and sometimes he does it in the winter, planning for the next winter. A friend of mine went up to Brunswick last winter and looked over some country which never has been trapped to amount to anything, and this year he's up there with a line over 100 miles long. Jerusalem! Where did he stay nights when he was looking it over?" asked Hal. "Wherever he happened to be," replied Alec. "Didn't he have no tent or nothing?" Sparrer was round-eyed with wonder. Alec shook his head. "Nothing but a week's supply of grub, his axe, rifle, and blanket. That's all any good woodsman needs." "But was it as cold as it is now?" asked Hal. "Colder, because that part of Brunswick is considerable farther north. When light came, he would just dig away the snow, build a fire, and when the ground was het up, move his fire back, lay some boughs down where the fire had been, and make a little bough shelter over it. Build a good big fire to reflect the heat and turn in. Sometimes when there's a big rock handy or an upturned tree, we warm up a place a little way in front of that, and then move the fire over against it and then turn in without any shelter at all. More'n once I've slept in just a hole in the snow. 'Tisn't so bad when you're used to it. Have to get up a few times in the night to put wood on the fire, but it ain't nothing, is it, Pat?" "'Tis no more than a reminder of how good it is to sleep," returned Pat. "When a man's prospecting for fur, he not only looks for signs of the beasties, but he looks the lay of the land over and gets the landmarks fixed in his mind," continued Alec. "He picks out a place for his main camp, locating it where he can get his supplies and stuff in and his furs out at the end of the season without too much difficulty. If it is in lumber country, he picks out a place that can be reached by some old trail with a little clearing out so that a team can get in. More often, though, he locates on a river, where he can get his stuff in by canoe, and can get out again the same way in the spring. At the same time, he tries to choose a location that will be to his best advantage in working his trap lines. If he's got a long line laid out, he also picks out likely places for temporary camps, places handy to springs and firewood. Early in the fall, he gets his stuff together and goes in to build his camps. Trappers mostly work in pairs, but sometimes one goes it alone, like my friend up in Brunswick. He took his traps and stuff in September, so as to get his camps built and be ready for business as soon as fur got prime." "Can one man build a log cabin without any help?" asked Walter. "Sure," replied Pat, "if he's reasonably husky, and most woodmen are. A smart axeman can roll up one in 4 days. But of course it's easier and quicker if there are two. The main camp is made stout and comfortable as possible, same as 'tis here, only usually 'tis not so big." Alec resumed the thread of his story. "The other camps are just big enough for a bunk and a cache of supplies, and are 1 or 2 days' journey apart, according to the country. In good weather, a feller doesna mind sleeping out one night between camps if he must, though he doesna aim to if he can help it. A few supplies are left in each camp, and firewood cut and left handy. When this work is done, it's usually about time to be getting after the critters. A long line is usually planned on a sort of loop when the country will permit, so that the trapper may go out one way and return another. When 2 are trapping together, partners like Pat and me, one works the line one way and one the other. Of course, 2 can work a longer line than one can, and cover it the way it ought to be covered. I've put in more in one winter alone. But you ken it's mighty satisfying to have speech with someone once in a while. When I'm alone, it gets so that I talk to the varmints just to hear a human voice, even though it be my own." "I shouldn't think it would be safe for a man to be all alone for so long," Upton interrupted. "'Tisn't altogether safe," replied Alec. "There was old Bill Bentley. Never was a better woodsman than old Bill. He used to trap way up north of here. Used to go it alone, mostly, but one winter he took a partner. Lucky thing for Bill, he did. They had a long line that year, and Bill covered it one way, and his partner, Big Frank, covered it the other. They would meet at the upper end and then again at the main camp. Well, one time Big Frank was a day late getting to the upper camp. A big bar had busted a swivel on the trap and gone off with the trap. Took Frank a whole day to catch up with him. When he got to the camp, he expected to find Bill waiting for him, but nary a sign of Bill could he find. This wasn't surprising, considering his own luck, but somehow it made Big Frank uneasy. He hit the trail afore daylight the next morning and did not stop to look at traps, but just made tracks watching out for some sign of Bill. Long about noon, he found him by a deadfall alongside of a bar. Of course, the critter was dead, and Bill would have been if he had to lay there much longer. Seems in resetting the deadfall, the lever with which he was raising the fall log broke, and somehow Bill got one leg under it, and there he was caught in his own trap with a broken leg to boot. Lucky for Bill it was early in the season, or he would have frozen to death long before Frank got there. As it was, he was in pretty bad shape. If he'd been trapping alone, it would have been the end of him. But I'm getting off my story and how we catch fur. Of course, we have to have a number of sizes of traps. For muskrats, we use number 1. For mink, number 1 or number 1.5. This is also big enough to hold fox, coon, and fisher, but number 2 is better. For marten, we use mostly number 1, but if there are signs of fisher or lynx, we use number 1.5, so if one happens to get into a trap, it will hold him. These critters are so strong that they will pull out of the smaller trap. It's marten that you're after mostly, isn't it? I understood you to say that, Upton interposed. We're after anything we can get, but most of our sets are for marten, returned Alec. In the fall we took a good many rats, and will again in the spring, but this time of year when everything is frozen, 'tis only around spring holes that we can get a rat now and then, since the law will not let us trap them in the houses. I dinna ken what these lawmakers want to meddle with a poor man's business for. So long as the rat is killed, I dinna see what the difference it makes where he's killed or how. We used to get good fur when it was no against the law to trap at the houses. Walt, here's a subject for a little missionary work. Alec is still an uncivilized savage in some things, especially when what he calls his rights to hunt and trap are concerned, Pat broke in. Upton looked a bit puzzled. I don't quite get the point about the house trapping, said he. You've seen muskrat houses aplenty, haven't you? Asked Pat. Walter nodded. Well, continued Pat, before this law was made, trappers used to chop a hole in the side of a house and set a trap on the bed inside. Of course, this drove the rats out, but they would soon be back, because there was nowhere else to go. By visiting the traps at night and morning, it was no trick at all to get all the rats. Now, the law forbids this kind of trapping. Alec here doesn't approve of the law. He thinks there are rats enough and to spare, and he can't see that that kind of work is cutting his own nose off and killing the goose that lays a golden egg. Says you can clean all the rats out of a place, and in time more will come and take their places. I can't make him see it any different. How about beaver? Asked Walter, turning to the Scotchman. Nowhere near as plentiful as they used to be, are they? The trapper shook his head. Been trapped pretty near out of this country. I'm for protecting the beaver, all right. But rats is different. You couldn't trap out all the rats in a million years. There's rats enough, and there always will be. Ever hear of the passenger pigeon? Asked Upton. Alex signified that he never had. Guess they didn't live in this country, he added. I guess they don't, replied Upton dryly. Fact is, they don't live in any country any more. What is supposed to be the very last specimen died in captivity in Cincinnati last year. A reward of several $1,000s for proof of a single pair nesting anywhere in America has stood for several years, but the bird is believed to be absolutely extinct. And yet 75 years ago they were numbered by millions and extended over America from the Atlantic to the Rocky Mountains. Probably billions would be nearer the truth. The ornithologist Wilson once watched a flock which he estimated to be a mile wide moving at the rate of a mile a minute, and it took 4 hours to pass. Allowing 3 birds for each square yard, there must have been more than 2 billion birds in that one flock. In 1869, one town in Michigan shipped to market in 40 days almost 12 million birds. They were so plentiful that they sold as low as 12 cents a dozen, and netters made money at that. When the first efforts to protect them were made, they were fruitless because people said that the numbers were so great that it would be impossible to ever reduce them to a serious extent. And today, there is not one living. It doesn't seem possible, but it is a cold, hard fact, and man alone is to blame. The same thing is happening right now with a lot of animals and birds. Just as sure as that fire is burning, 50 years we'll see a lot of them extinct unless they are better protected. The hunters of the pigeon didn't believe it any more than you believe it about the rats. On the level, Alec, do you think it a square deal to take a rat in the only place he's got to stay in the winter?" "Oh, I'm not taking him that way," Alec protested with some haste. "I believe in respecting the law, even if it is a fool law." "But is it a fool law? I don't think so," said Walter quietly. "In a boxing match it is a foul to hit a man when he's down." "'Tisn't in a lumberman's fight," Alec broke in. "If a man's down, so much the better. Then you've got him. That's the thing to do. Get him down and then do him good." "I say, yous don't mean that." Sparrow's eyes went round with indignation, for even a street gameman has better ethics than this. "It's the way they fight up here, Sparrow, I'm sorry to say," said Pat. "In a rough and tumble fight here they kick, bite, and gouge, and you may well pity the underman. But they're learning better." "Would you hit a man who was bound and helpless?" asked Walter quickly. "Certainly not," cried Alec indignantly. "That's different." "Not so very different from your rats and your houses," protested Upton. "They come pretty near to being helpless. Besides, they have no reason to suspect harm there, and they don't. Put it up to any scout, he need say right off the reel that it's unfair, and that is something that no scout will stand for. But this has nothing to do with Martin. You were saying, Alec, that you trap for Martin mostly?" "Aye," replied Alec, rather glad to have the subject changed, if the truth were known. "And it's the prettiest and most comfortable kind of trapping in the winter. You see, the beasties are found in heavy timber and broken country, and that gives the trapper more protection from cold and storms. Then the beasties are not so hard to trap as some others. When you find Martin's sign, you may be pretty sure that the critter will be along there again. They live on mice, rabbits, birds, and squirrels. Fish makes good bait. When the snows are not too heavy, I build a little cubby, a pen, you can, of sticks at the foot of a big tree. The tree form on the back, and roof it over with evergreen branches to keep out the snow. On a little bed of boughs I set the trap just inside the opening of the cubby, and cover it lightly with tips of evergreen. The bait is placed on a stick at the back of the cubby. I hang a couple of boughs partly over the opening so that if Whiskey Jack happens along, he won't see the bait and steal it." Here Pat interrupted to explain for Sparrow's benefit that a Whiskey Jack is the common name in the North for the Canada jay. "I shouldn't think the martin could get his peepers on the bait, then," said Sparrow. "He doesn't need to, laddie," replied Alec. "His nose finds it for him. Another set which I like and use a good deal is this. I cut a small spruce about 4 inches through, so as to leave a stump about 2 feet above the snow. And on top of this I cut a V or crotch, and after trimming off the lower limbs of the tree, I rest it in the crotch, so that the butt end projects some distance and is 3 or 4 feet above the snow. About a foot from the butt end, I flatten off a place for the trap and tie it in place with a bit of string and loop the chain around the trunk of the tree. Then I make a split at the end of the butt, and in this fasten the bait. Mr. Martin runs up the tree to get the bait, steps on the trap, and falls off and hangs there. He can't twist a foot or pull free in any way. Once he steps on the trap, he's a goner. Deadfalls work pretty well with Martin. You'll have a chance to see some, as I've got some right handy here in some drawers off the hollow. You'll understand them better by seeing them than me trying to tell you about them." "How about otter?" asked Hal. "Steel traps for them, and we have to be some particular how we set them. There's nary a critter that I know of more suspicious of man," replied Alec. "In the fall and spring we get 'em with water sets. I got one this fall up at one of the beaver dams. I cut a hole in the middle of the dam so that the runoff from the pond was all through this, but not enough to lower the pond and bring the beavers to stop up the hole. I made the passage only 8 or 9 inches wide and set the trap in the water at the upper end. The first otter to come along tried to go through that opening, and I had him. Sometimes when we find a point of landing out into a lake or big stream, we'll find an otter trail across it where the critter has taken a short cut. Then we set a trap in the water at one end. Water sets are best, because there is no human scent. In the winter we set under the ice, and I'll show you a couple of sets of that kind before you go back." "And foxes?" prompted Upton. Alec grinned. "They're worse than otter," he confessed. "You think you can all about the critters, and then you meet up with one that just gives you the laugh. Like the silver that's hanging around here. I've tried every set I know for that feller, but he's still grinning at me. And this crust ain't going to help matters any. It's bad enough in dry snow, but with a crust there won't be anything doing. In the fall I use the water sets where I can. One of the best is at a shallow spring 4 or 5 feet across. About 1.5 feet from the shore, put a moss-covered stone or a sod, so that it will come just above the level of the water. Halfway between this and the shore set up the trap, covering the jaws, springs, and chain with mud or wet leaves from the bottom. The pan should be just under the water, and on this place a little piece of moss or sod, so that it will come an inch above the water. On the outer stone or sod put a small piece of bait and a little scent. Mr. Fox comes along, smells the bait, and promptly investigates. He doesn't like to wet his feet, and a bit of covering on the pan of the trap looks like a good stepping place. Then you have him. You must take care to leave everything in perfectly natural state. I wade up the outlet and take care not to touch the banks. Some trappers boil the traps in hemlock boughs to kill the scent. Others just leave 'em overnight in running water. I wear clean gloves to handle the traps. There are a lot of dry sets, some with bait and some without, the latter being used in frequented runways. A very good set is to find an old moss-covered log or stump and set the trap at the highest point, covering it so that the whole thing looks just as it did before. Then toss a big bait like a muskrat or rabbit 8 or 10 feet from it. Mr. Fox is always suspicious, and before he goes too near anything like that, he will go to the highest point to look the ground over. That's when you got him. Of course, there mustn't be any other high point for him to get on. You spoke of scents, Alec. I read about them. What are they, anyhow? Asked Upton. For answer, Alec got up and went to the corner of the cabin and brought forth an old fruit jar. Pat grinned. Here's some, said Alec simply as he unscrewed the cover while the boys crowded around. They took one whiff and then fairly tumbled over each other to get away. Cover it up, take it away, howled Hal, holding his nose. I won't be able to eat a square meal for a week. Me too, yelped Spar. They have some awful smells in New York, but this is the limit. Jumping crickets. I should think that stuff would drive things away and not attract them, exclaimed Upton. What is it, anyhow? Skunk fat and mice cut up and put in the jar and hung in the sun until thoroughly rotted, and then some skunk and muskrat scent added. Sorry you don't like it, replied Pat. A drop or two judiciously used seems to be a great attraction for foxes and other critters. Alec has got another brand, if you would like to sample it. Fish oil made by cutting up fish and letting them rot in the same way. It's a mighty good scent. No, thanks, cried Hal hastily. We'll take your word for it. What about those stretching boards? I'm coming to that, replied Alec. Raw furs are handled in 2 ways, cased and open. Mink, marten, fox, fisher, weasel, muskrat, skunk, and bobcat are cased. That is what these boards are for. We skin 'em by cutting loose around the feet and then cutting down the back of the hind legs into around the vent, and then skin the hind legs carefully, and also the tail. Then the skin is turned back and stripped off the body wrong side out to the ears, taking as little fat as possible. The ears are cut off close to the head, and the skin is cut loose around the eyes and nose. The easiest way is to hang the critter up by the hind legs after skinning out these and the tail. These small boards Pat and I are making are for muskrats in the spring. For marten, mink, otter, fisher, and such, we like to use longer, narrower boards. That is, they are narrower in proportion to their length. I'll show you some presently. The best boards are those with a narrow strip ripped out to the middle for the whole length. This makes a wedge or tongue. Of course, it should be tapered. This makes it possible to use the board for various size animals and to stretch the skin to its fullest extent. It also makes it easy to remove a skin from the board, as taking out the wedge at once loosens the whole board. The skins are put on stretchers, fur side in. Then with a blunt knife they are fleshed. That is, they are scraped clean of every particle of fat and flesh. Then they are stretched to their fullest extent and put to dry or cure in a cool, airy place. As soon as dry enough to prevent shrinking or wrinkling, they are taken from the boards. Lynx and fox are then turned fur side out, and the others are left as they are. Beaver, coon, bear, wolf, and badger are skinned open. That means that a cut is made from the point of the jaw straight down the belly to the vent. A cut is made down the inside of the forelegs across the breast to the point of the brisket, and another down the back of the hind legs. Big animals like bears, wolves, and wolverines should be skinned out to the ends of their toes and have the feet left on. These skins are stretched flat. A coon nearly square, a beaver round, and others to their natural shape. The best way is by lacing them with twine and a frame. Many trappers lose money by careless handling of the furs. All dirt, blood, and lumps should be carefully removed. Lots of skins, prime when caught, grade way down because of careless handling. Now I guess you chaps have got your fill of furs. What about tomorrow? It's Christmas, you ken." "That's so, and it will be the queerest Christmas I have ever spent," said Hal thoughtfully. "We ought to celebrate somehow. What's the program, Pat?" "How about a rabbit hunt in the morning, a big dinner, and a shooting match in the afternoon?" replied Pat. "Bully!" cried all three together. "What's the matter with a Christmas tree in the evening?" added Upton. "We ought to do something Christmassy." "I was going to suggest that very thing," retorted Hal. "We'll make it the greatest Christmas this old hollow ever saw. Now let's turn in. I want to be out for those rabbits right early. By the way, Alec, I hope there's some of that venison left for the big feast." "Dinna ye worry, laddie. I ha' saved a roast special," replied Alec as he prepared things for the night. End of chapter 10.